Hey, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire, we're going to go into depth and talk about Ranger Airfield with Jared Calvert, who's the mastermind, the slave worker bee that has made it all happen, actually. So we're going to talk to him. He's just dropped in, flying a T6 for the air show with Ranger, which is going to be on the 4th and 5th of October, Ranger Airfield, F-23. Be there, be square. It's just a couple of weeks from now. So anyway, Jared, how did you happen to be in the neighborhood on the way?
Stephen Covington asked me to fly his T6 to the Jefferson City Air Show, the Show Me State Capital Air Show, and he told me to take the airplane home for our Ranger Air Show. So I dropped in a T6 yesterday, and Stephen obviously trusts me with his airplane, but your 40-foot runway, he sent me a text to make sure I got here okay. What is the length here, 2,500?
2,500 paved. We've got 1,500 feet of grass, but it's all downhill. So, yeah. And it's actually a pretty good drop-off between the grass and the pavement on that end, but I've never run off the end.
Yeah, easy landing in the T6 here, so which is... I see what you just acquired behind me. I'm excited to see you fly this over to Ranger.
Yeah, it's going to Ranger, so if you want to see it, I'm doing the annual on it right now. We'll be done by then, so come see it. So anyway, thanks for dropping in. So the setup for this actually is this hangar we're in, FlyWire Headquarters 2.0. This building was supposed to be at Ranger Airfield a year and a half ago.
Yes, yeah, Scott was going to be one of our lead builders on the airfield, a project I'd been working on basically since I was 8 years old. I've been volunteering at the airfield since I was 5, and I was 8 when I drew my first iteration of a museum hangar on the airfield. And this hangar, we were very excited to have it built at Ranger, but through greed and abuse of power by a couple, specifically one city official, they've ruined, in the short term, the airfield, our mission at the foundation. Scott and Dana were going to move to Ranger. They actually sold their house and broke ground to build this hangar on our airfield, among other builders, and that was ruined by, in my view, an abuse of power and now municipal attorneys.
Yeah, it was a long and sordid path, and it looks like there's some resolution here, more or less close to the end of the road. Do you want to share that with us?
I've been optimistic through this whole process, but the foolish decisions that people are capable of making over and over again, especially when they're using taxpayer money, it seems to have no end, have no bounds. And so I wouldn't be surprised if this could go to the state Supreme Court. And through privileges afforded to municipalities or government, this case could actually go to the Supreme Court of Texas twice.
Twice? How does that work?
Well, when we originally filed the lawsuit, the city's claim was they had governmental immunity, and that put a lockdown on depositions and discovery.
So just real quick, what that meant was, or what was happening is that the city and Ranger Airfield Foundation had signed a contract that had been majority written by the city lawyers that let Ranger Airfield Foundation manage the airfield, and then through another city council meeting with a proposal, who this particular city councilman actually voted for.
Actually voted for it.
If they met certain restrictions, certain performance metrics, then the airfield would be deeded from the city to the Ranger Airfield Foundation, and they would be able to sell lots, and people would be able to build hangars there.
Yeah.
And that's what led to this impasse.
Yeah, I think, well, in a moment we can go into reason why there was a contract to begin with, but to answer your question on how it could go to the Supreme Court twice is the city claimed governmental immunity, and that puts a lockdown on depositions and discoveries. And we actually had our first hearing, not to hear any subject matter on the case, but the hearing over governmental immunity. And the 91st District Court sided with the airfield, struck down the city's 5 pleas. They threw all kind of claims against the wall for their governmental immunity claim, and they lost. That opened the door for actual discovery and deposition over a year ago. but the city filed an appeal, and that's called an interlocutory appeal. I didn't know what interlocutory was, but what it is you and I sign a contract for this T6, and we say it's yellow. If you were to then say, well, no, this isn't a yellow T6, that locks down the case until an expert comes in and says it's yellow or not. In the state of Texas, you and I couldn't appeal an interlocutory order, an order that says that is a yellow T6, now let's hear subject matter. You can't appeal that. But under exceptions in state law, guess who can appeal an interlocutory order?
The city.
Government. So it's a very frustrating situation because now we're a year and a half into the case and no subject matter has been heard. We're merely arguing about if the city has governmental immunity or not. And I don't like that. I think that that's state law that needs to be changed. This has me wanting to run for state rep one day, and my first House bill will be, stop giving governments the privileges that the normal people don't have. And it's understandable why you would not want interlocutory appeals, because if you said that this is not a yellow T6 and then you lost, and you could appeal again and go, well, what color yellow is it? You can't just have all of these interlocutory appeals. And the state knows that. That's why you and I as private citizens aren't afforded that. But they have special rules. And so the game is rigged against the people, and we're going to prevail. We will win. And every time governmental immunity has gone before the state Supreme Court, the state has lost.
State is lost. And that's the important point I wanted to make there is that this entities claim immunity. Basically, they sign a contract and then break it. And they say, you can't come against us because, we're immune.
Yeah.
Which is crazy when you think about it, is if you have a contract, you have to perform, and here are the penalties if you don't perform. It's in the contract, and they just don't like it anymore, and they can break it.
It's completely amoral. The moral level to be on, I'm going to sign a contract with you, and you know what, I'm going to break it, and I can just because I can, is shameful. And the behavior of the politicians and their use of taxpayer money has been shameful. And they should be accountable for that taxpayer money.
They should be.
So when I said that these cases that make it all the way to the Supreme Court on governmental immunity, the governments lose, that doesn't stop them from pulling this claim. And I think what it's used is a mechanism to bleed plaintiffs dry or to wash out poorer plaintiffs.
And how that works really is unfortunately, to a large degree, our legal system, it depends on how deep your pockets are. And if the city is using taxpayer money to pay for their lawyers and you're paying your own money, then that's when they run you out. And that's how they win.
Yes. Luckily, our contract has a clause in it that if anything were to go to court, there'd be a dispute, the loser has to pay the attorney's fees, which would only put the taxpayers on the hook for more. But I don't think these politicians care about that.
Well, tell me why, how did Ranger Airfield come to have the contract to manage the airfield anyway? How did it originally start? What was the need?
Ever since I was very young, I saw that the airfield didn't have the support it needed to carry itself forward. There were volunteers that would keep the grass mowed, but there was no, proactive advocacy. There would be a fly-in, 25 airplanes would show up, and maybe once a year there'd be enough money to buy an air compressor. So no real funding mechanism or even business mechanism to make it last another century. The airfield goes back to 1911. Earhart landed there. The only hangar until we built a hangar there in 2019 was built in 1928. And it's very dilapidated. Pipes are totally rusted in two. The hangar floods. The wiring is cloth wrapped. It has glass fuses. It needs a restoration. And I saw that from a young age, and so I created the Ranger Airfield Foundation in 2008, and we mowed it as volunteers with no contract for a decade. But then we decided we wanted to build a museum building. We acquired a 1918 Curtiss Jenny. We needed a home for that and other aircraft.
This can be the Black Cats.
Yep.
That's the T-shirt.
And
it's there, by the way, at Ranger.
Yep. The wings are ready for fabric, and other than that, it's ready to go. So So I went to the city for the contract in 2018, and they signed a 30-year lease for it. But about 3 years in, 2021, I realized that all of my work was for nothing because nobody else flew at Ranger. Ranger's about 2,000 people. It's a very depressed economy. It's a boom town that's now a ghost town. Used to be 30,000 people in the 1920s, and it's down to 2,000. Downtown is dead. The city has equipment that they had to take batteries from one piece to another piece to start them. Their water infrastructure is poor. Their municipal pool has been closed since 2019, and their streets are not being maintained. It's just a very bad situation for the community. There's no infrastructure plan to repair their poor infrastructure.
There's no base,
no tax base. Yeah, and the lack of business sense. And you'll see how that reared its head in this deal. So 2021, I went to the city council and I said, look, my work is not being protected. I'm giving several thousand hours a year to this airfield without pay. I'm not paid as a director. And what's the use if I were to die unexpectedly in a couple of years, or I live out until 2048 at the end of the term and nobody flies at Ranger? And so I went to them humbly and said, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to make sure the airfield is mowed only until 2048, or do you want me to develop it with antique style hangars? Highly restricted. They had to look vintage. And they unanimously said, we want you to do this. It needs to be said, and it can't be understated, that we are in this because the city. This is a contract they wanted. I was prepared to move to Austin. I was looking to go to work at UT, possibly in their fundraising department, step away from aviation for a little while, and they said, no, we want you to build. So they hired their own attorney. They had 4 meetings over the span of 98 days. It was unanimous at every one. They called us to City Hall to sign the contract to build antique-style hangars, and that's where you came in. We decided we wanted to start a kids program, and Scott was flying me to look at a 150 for this kids program, and I was telling him about this contract that had been approved, and Scott said, you know, I'm looking to get away from a more populated area, sell my hangar, and what do you think about Dana and I building at Ranger? Would love to have you. That was my response. And contract was signed, and you sold your hangar, moved to a rental house based off of this contract, and we broke ground, and then it fell apart.
It all fell apart, and we had we were homeless, so we had to do something. We had the hangar already ordered, so we ended up moving here to just outside of Canton, Texas, on the east side of Dallas.
Yep.
Instead of the west side of Fort Worth. But how did the whole thing fall apart then? You know, and we'd already scratched ground. We were getting ready to start framing and then plumbing for the foundation, and then everything was put on hold. Everything was stopped.
Yes, so we had a signed contract. We broke ground. We had multiple builders. $100,000 in windows and doors had been ordered and delivered, and one of the city commissioners that had not grown up in Ranger, had only moved in the previous couple of years, had not seen the work that had gone into the airfield. He had approved the contract. After it was signed and we broke ground, he sent an email to another city official and said, we could have sold the airfield for millions. And shortly thereafter, we get an email from the city manager telling us to stop construction. The city council did not vote on it. We feel that the manager probably sent that email in either agreement with the city commissioner or pressured by the city commissioner to send that stop order. And from there on, it was barrier after barrier. They wouldn't even meet with us to try to figure out why that we had received a stop construction order. We requested meeting after meeting, in person, online, phone, even stood up in a council meeting and said, we're putting an agenda item request. We have a contract with you. We're being told we can't perform, and we're not being allowed to be on the agenda and have a meeting with you. And it was to no avail. So we tried for 6 months to meet with the city, and you were witness to some of those council meetings where we tried to get an audience with the council, and the city denied us. So after 6 months, we pulled the lawsuit trigger and sued them for breach of contract. We were not told we had done anything wrong. They had the airfield appraised in the meantime. They were promising us, we have it in emails and in writing, where the city said, we're waiting on the appraisal for the airfield, and we'll meet with you after that appraisal. They got their appraisal, and they wouldn't meet with us.
So what did the appraisal actually come through at?
Well, it's been a long roundabout way to find out what it came back at, because when the city got it back, when their appraisal that they paid for with taxpayer money, with a licensed appraiser, came back to them, they wouldn't meet with us as the city had promised by writing. And I called the city manager and I said, why aren't we meeting? And he goes, the council isn't happy. Their appraisal came back too low. So they were looking, in my opinion, with the statements we had from the city manager to the evidence, is they were trying to extort us. I have no doubt, because I had a great working relationship with them. The airfield had a great working relationship with the city. There was a reason why there was unanimous decision after unanimous decision for the airfield, and their city support, not financially, but through contracts and city equipment, and just overwhelming support for things like the air show. Is we were just scratching by for many years, but then because people fundraised for the airfield and we raised a lot of money for the airfield, they looked at what they could take from us. It purely, when the evidence is all heard, and if it were to go the full length in court, you're going to see that it was an extortion attempt.
So yeah, one of the things the thing about the appraisal, what it has to do, it has to pay attention to what the land is, and what exists on the land, and what the land is an airport. But it's not bound by anything federal because it never got any federal money. But because the contract says basically Ranger has this has the lease to manage the airport for 30 years, that means that you can't do anything with it. In other words, Ranger Airfield Foundation can't develop it or anything like that, but it can't be anything but an airfield. So there's a restriction on the land, and that affects its value. So if you wanted to put a DC for Walmart or something, you couldn't do it because it's an airfield. Maybe in 30 years, when it expires, you could readdress that, but you can't right now. So that affects the value, and that was one of the big drivers of this.
Actually, you would think that. Scott and I haven't talked about this much over the last few years because, again, this is the first time I've been in his hangar, and it's a kind of a negative experience for me because Scott was going to be our instructor for our youth program, and this hangar and the others that were going to be built like it, it's very personal for me. I've given my life to this airfield and these hangars, and more importantly, the people that were going to build them, like Scott and Dana and the other builders, would have been very good for the community. There is not an overabundance of people for the children of Ranger to look up to. And so to correct that is the city actually didn't put in their appraisal that it was supposed to stay an airfield. Ironically, I had to run a recall, get the bad parties removed from the city council, and then get elected to the city council. So now I'm on the city council, basically suing myself. And finally, after over a year of asking for the appraisal, now as a commissioner, I could walk in and say, I want to see the appraisal. And in the very first paragraph of this 59-page appraisal, it said, under the direction of the city council, I was told not to consider the airfield lease or that is an airport. You know, it actually says specifically, despite there being runways, buildings, hangars, landscaping, roads, I'm not to consider any of this an appraisal. So how do you appraise your T6 if you say, well, here's the whole T6, but I'm not to consider the paint or windows? It makes no sense. And that appraiser was told to do that by the council, quietly.
Yeah, and it still came in low.
It still came in low. To them. It came in actually what the land is worth in the area, but this Californian that moved in, that got on the council, that approved the contract, must have been thinking, you know, Santa Paula dollars or something. He's the one that promised it would be in the millions. It wasn't even 20% of what he promised. And when he had egg on his face, he can't ever be wrong. You look at They've actually sent us a letter saying they wanted to have it reappraised. So they bought their own appraiser, and it came in too low. Let's get a second opinion. You know what? We're going to say we have government immunity and the court rules against us. Let's get a second opinion. They appealed it to the appeals court. They fought their own recall. The 11th Court of Appeals ruled against the city on the recall. They appealed that to the state Supreme Court, and the state Supreme Court denied them. If something doesn't go their way, their city is completely incapable of even taking a step back and go, whoa, maybe we had it wrong. And it's going to take a court forcing them to realize they got it wrong. They're certainly not listening to the people. 78% voted to remove these people from office. In a state where recalls are less than 50% successful, the citizens removed 2 officials with a 78% vote. So the people have spoken. They want better representation. Now it's in the hands of an attorney in Austin that I believe is just milking the citizens, which don't have a lot of money to begin with, dry. It's out of my hands. You know, for many years, if the grass needed to be mowed, I would mow it. Needed to fix a tractor, Dad and I would repair it. Needed air show pilots, I could call friends that would fly the air show. You delivered on a call. We needed a hangar, and you had that steel structure for the first hangar that you donated to us. And so the foundation and its base success has been off of the Perdue's generosity, and that's what Ranger needed. Ranger needed Scott and Dana, and that's what I've tried to convey to the citizens of Ranger. A lot of them don't even know what you look like or that you're even real, and they've been told that you're a hangar in an avenue to try to get public opinion. What was it you said yesterday about truth? Truth is the first casualty. In a maneuver to try to get public support against the airfield, this person said that all of the hangars were going to be tax-free, despite the evidence that we put in writing that they weren't, statements that we said in person, documents that has been submitted in court. And so I've told people, you know, Scott's hangar was going to be built, windows were delivered, engineering was done, and Scott was going to be paying taxes. So I guess, would you like to go on the record to say if your hangar in East Texas is tax-free or not?
It isn't, unfortunately.
Yeah, so we're in a building that was supposed to be in Ranger, and Scott was going to be teaching the youth to fly there. We had actually picked out 2 high school students to learn to fly, and we had the 150 for them, and we were looking to get a Piper Cub for them to get at their tail wheel in as well. And we were going to take underprivileged kids that honestly wrote heartbreaking letters by hand saying why they needed this opportunity. And I've told people in Ranger, you know, Scott, you flew F-4s and F-15s in the Air Force. You were lead advance on Air Force One. You were an American Airlines captain. You've got business experience through contracting. You're an A&P, IA, a CFI. Your wife was an officer in the Air Force as well. And all this, and this channel that you're watching on now, FlyWire, is the last thing I referenced. There's over 50,000 subscribers, and it's mostly dedicated to aviation safety. You couldn't want a better person to influence the youth of Ranger. They needed you. And the citizen that moved in from California that has so low moral character to say, well, I'm immune, and I'm going to use taxpayer money at will, and I don't care what I agreed to, I don't care what we signed for, I don't care what you've spent, I don't care what you've sacrificed, you know, I know best, I know all. That is not the type of person the kids in Ranger will ever look up to. And the cost has been huge. You're talking about generational change that you were going to make, and my heart breaks for those kids. I still have their letters in my top drawer of the toolbox saying that they needed this opportunity. And it's the opportunity I needed when I was growing up there. There weren't Scott Perdue's on the field when I grew up there. And the cost has been high. This isn't just a financial cost for this town of Ranger. This has been, this is a moral hit. So I don't know what the future holds. It's in the court's hands. It's in the quality of the attorneys on both sides. And we'll see what happens.
So my understanding of it is you guys were in the court-mandated mediation. Mm-hmm. Okay, and you got through that with some agreement, but you're hung up on a couple of issues, and it looks like at this point it's going to fail.
Yeah, I would guess that it would. I think, asking for very little, when you take out the damages and all you're left with is attorney's fees, I think it's fair to say pay our attorney's fees. And the foundation agrees, and the city goes, no, we're not covering that. It's like, well, we requested meeting after meeting for 6 months to try to avoid lawsuit. There could have been a more efficient way had you not claimed government immunity. This could have probably already been resolved and people been building out there if you hadn't appealed the first decision. Their most recent game was earlier this year. They terminated our lease, and I had to just take the stand for over an hour in front of the district court judge explaining why the lease was terminated by them and why it wasn't our fault, and he agreed. So now there is a lease, there's an injunction, but the city that's been losing at every turn through recalls and court decisions and public opinion, they voted to terminate the lease off of a little insurance clause that we weren't performing to, that they ignorantly didn't even understand we weren't performing to it because the city told us not to perform to it years ago. And we explained that in court, took the stand, and the court agreed. So they just cannot make a right decision. And they're trying to play games with the system, and you can manipulate for a little while, but it doesn't last in the long run.
So what's the future? How do we help Ranger Airfield? How do we keep this? This is, I think, maybe the oldest continuously used grass strip in the United States.
Municipal-wise,
I think the argument could be made.
I think so, yeah. You had the first airplane landed there in 1911. It was a Wright Model B. The guy was actually instructed by both Wright brothers. They were both still alive when Robert Fowler learned to fly. And thereafter, it was unofficially known as the airfield, and then it was officially dedicated in 1928. And there are a few older airfields in Texas that are still in existence, like Ellington or Love, Stinson Field in San Antonio, but they've all been developed. Ranger is nothing but grass. It's a grass field. And that's what we didn't want to ruin the feel of that by requiring all of these hangars to look vintage. So we're going to see what the appellate court rules. We have a gentleman that has agreed to match the donated funds for the legal fund. Hopefully the city will get some wisdom, but it could go all the way to the state Supreme Court. If the appellate court rules against them, they may try to appeal. So we'll just have to see what happens.
So the best way for people to help out is to go to rangerairfield.org.
Rangerairfield.org. You can see the progress that we had made until the stop order, what we're doing with vintage airplanes. And everything is on there, including the work that we got done. Rangerairfield.org/work.
And Ranger Airfield is a 501c3, so it's tax deductible, and you can donate on the site. You're running a raffle right now.
Yeah, we're going to sell out today on the raffle, so the winner will be drawn and announced by the air show. So we give away an airplane. This is our seventh annual airplane to give away, and we don't know what we'll do next year. Maybe a 150. We'll see. Okay.
Well, great. That, and you can come to the air show on the 4th and the 5th. In camp, there's hotels in the area, not many in Ranger, but
yeah, everything's on the site for the event. It's a good time, usually about 250 to 280 airplanes. It's a great time.
Be there or be square. Air show at 1?
We have an evening air show on Friday, and then we have an afternoon air show. You think about 7 acts this year on Saturday. Okay. Our show pilots come in and donate. That's why took bringing the T6 over. Covington's going to fly the 6. David Martin's flying the Bucher. Numerous other pilots flying as well.
Well, thanks for coming and updating us on the progress and the situation there at Ranger Airfield. I appreciate it and wish you all the best. Do what I can to help. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. on FlyWire.